everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I have to tell you, when I started doing this intro, I started doing the intro for the other podcast I do with my wife, Couples Therapy, because it's been a week since I've had any caffeine. I got COVID. So if you listen to last week's episode, you heard me question, do I have COVID? Is it happening? Well, that night, it surely did, with a 101.6 degree fever. And then this last week, I've just been alone quarantining in this bedroom. It not great. Although I guess technically it is quote unquote mild in that I am not dead. So I guess yay for being double boosted. But yes, so my brain is no brain fog, but my natural state is kind of brain foggy. So without any caffeine, just trying to hang on to dear life. If I have to do anything like this, I have a meeting later on Zoom, and I don't know, maybe I should have caffeine. Anyway, you're not here for this. You're here for today's great guest. This is a fantastic episode. One of my favorite comics writers. This is Kieron Gillen. And if you don't know who Kieron is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Stafford in the West Midlands of England, Eisner Award-winning comics writer Kieron Gillen began his writing career as a games journalist, writing for publications like PC Gamer UK, Wired, The Guardian, among others. His early comics work included a comic strip with Jamie McKelvey, which started their long and celebrated working partnership that led to incredible comics like Phonogram, Young Avengers, and The Wicked and the Divine. While Kieron's works are too numerous to name, some of his best-known comics include his Uncanny X-Men run, Die, Star Wars Darth Vader, Star Wars Dr. Aphra, Loki Journey into Mystery, and most currently, Eternals, Immortal X-Men, and the massive crossover Judgment Day. I should say, if the quality of this intro is not great recording-wise, is because I'm doing this on my phone in the bedroom, and I don't want to go contaminate the microphone outside. I hope it's good enough. Anyway, I love Kieron's work. I think I first read his Young Avengers. I think that's what clued me into him. I was going to say keyed me into him. I think either one works, but he's a writer that I think is good at both plot and narrative and dialogue and character. You know, sometimes you get one or the other. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of writers I love who are just great at narrative. George R. R. Martin, for example. Honestly, I'm not a fan of his prose. I'm not a fan of the way he writes. Well, yeah, I think that's true. But I think he can write a good character, and he can write a good narrative. Not good with the language part and not good with the dialogue part, but, you know, Kieron, though, I don't mean to lift Kieron up by disparaging another writer. Again, I'm just holding on for dear life at the moment. Metaphorically, I'm through the worst of the COVID. I'm just talking about verbally holding on to dear life. But the point is, I think Kieron is all around a fantastic writer, and his Judgment Day crossover is perhaps one of the best comics crossovers I've read in I don't know how long, at least a decade or not, if not more. It's really wonderful. So I hope you like this episode. We get into a lot of philosophical bits about childhood, and I thought it was just great. So if you do, by the way, and you want to check out other episodes of Beginnings, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. If you like this episode, maybe this is your first episode. You've never heard Beginnings before, and you're like, okay, I like the cut of this guy's jib. What are some other episodes I might want to listen to? Well, I've talked to a ton of comics writers, including Chris Claremont, Cy Spurrier, Chip Zdarsky, Kelly Thompson, Jim Starlin, Charles Sewell, Ryan North, plenty of others. Why not start there? And if you like that, I have been doing this show for 12 years. I've talked to hundreds of comics writers and authors and TV writers and musicians and artists and comedians and actors. So why not subscribe to the show if you like it? Leave a review. That would really help. Helps people find the show. It's been 12 years, I haven't really asked for people to write reviews, but if you have 30 seconds and you're at work and you're bored, you don't mind dropping a little 5-star review, I would be grateful. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. I've got some awesome episodes coming up. A lot of musicians. Dear Nora next week. Katie Davidson there, wonderful, fantastic musician. Robin Holcomb, who is one of the, I would say, foundational members of the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s New York downtown art scene. She was great. Tara Jane O'Neill, again, another brilliant musician, part of the whole Louisville indie rock scene of the 90s, and has just been making fantastic music for the last 30 years. So look forward to those episodes. But for now, let's talk to Kieron.
Are you going on holiday or are you going away for?
I'm going to visit my mum, actually, because it's kind of like my brother's taking his kids down there. So it'll be basically the first time everyone's got together and met Iris. So we'll be there for like 5 days in one house and we'll see how that goes. It's only like, it's 4 hours drive, so it's nothing to Americans. But like, it's the first time we'd be able to get up there due to various reasons. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
So wait, is that a holiday for you, or is that it? Because we were about to visit my parents, and then some people got COVID in my family, and so we canceled the trip, and it was actually kind of a relief a little bit.
It's like intellectual. I know what you mean. It's not a holiday. Considering I've done some trips to Chris's parents, I find them more stressful. Like I get on, I get really well with my mum, and of course this whole trip could be a complete disaster. But considering how hard like the work's been for the last few months, and it's now slackening off, I count this as a holiday right now. If I'm not here, it's a holiday. So we'll see how I feel when I get there. That may differ.
So no matter how like emotionally destructive, if at all, it is, it's still like not having to sit at your computer trying to figure out story or like what should Nightcrawler say.
Let's be honest, that's going to carry on anyway. I'll be writing in the car. Like I'll be doing I just can't help myself. But like, what else am I going to do? Relax?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, okay. So this is the thing. Are you a workaholic? Like it's been a problem for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't mean workaholic in like just a kind of like colloquial, like, oh, ha ha ha, you work a lot, but just like where like I'm obsessing. It's like 2 a.m. and I like have a line in a script and I'm just like, oh, that would be good. And then I have to and then I'm like, I can't sleep because I'm like writing this thing in my head. Yeah.
There's bits of that. Weirdly, I know exactly what you're saying, actually. I don't often count that as actually the workaholic stuff. As in, of course, now you say it, that's exactly what it is. But yeah, I'm regularly in the middle of the night and I get my phone, I text myself a line, I try to get off of it. Yeah. I'm better than boundaries than I used to be. Like, and to be fair, I'm just somebody who likes being productive. And when and just when I relax and not doing the job, I'll do something else. Like it's a break from the writing. I'll write a role-playing game or whatever nonsense I'll end up churning out. I do try to I only really, quote unquote, work on my day job Monday to Friday. Abstractly, I'm not working on Saturday and Sunday anymore. So I'm not doing family. Now I'm doing family stuff, but even before then, it's like, if I'm going to work, I'll do something else. And the idea of just, I always think that bit in one of the William Goldman books that like, if you're working as a screenplay writer, you have to do something else. You have to write plays, write poetry, anything which isn't the machine. And I kind of think that's true of work for hire comics as well. As in, like, you need to do something other than work for hire comics, or it will eat you alive, or at least eat your like creativity alive. And it's much more sustainable now. And of course, on a completely practical level, planning not to work at weekends means you can work weekends. Mm. So when the shit hits the fan, it's like, oh, right, now, I've got a sprint in me. But even then, my wife is always sort of not always complaining, but always noted it. It's not like we're going on a holiday anywhere, because I'm always kind of thinking, oh yeah. She always talks about a story about walking down this park in London, which is Greenwich Park, and she's enjoying the view, and I'm thinking this will make a great base for Mr. Sinister, which turns up like. I honestly, like, if she toured my first Uncanny run, is literally just me describing what the view was from that thing and thinking about how a Victorian guy would see it. So it's just, you're never quite off.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking back to like when I first started to do comedy in New York, and I was taking classes at UCB, and my teacher, like just for my second level, is like, hey, if this is all you do, you're going to be the worst at it. If like you don't have a life outside of it, you will not be good, because like to feed whatever your art is, right, you have to have a life outside of that. I mean, my wife's a stand-up, and I know for her it's a real problem if like she's not living life, because then she can't generate, like, most of her stand-up comes from going and doing things and then making jokes about that stuff.
Yeah, it's I mean, you view your mind like an ecology. You know what I mean? Like, essentially, you're deforesting your life and your experiences. That's what it is. You know, you really like. I mean, now I've reached a point where my work slowed down a bit, so I can stop and work at what hell I want to do next. And that really is kind of me looking at my life and going, okay, what haven't I written about? What's bothering me? What trauma have I not plunged? And that's fun, you know, and it's interesting because there's always new stuff, you know, and the world will throw stuff at you if you pay attention to it. But you're right. I mean, I often worry, like I used to be like a games journalist before this. Like I worked as a critic and all that kind of stuff. And so like my life's been weird. Like my exposure to normal life is probably less than many people's, I think. But of course, you end up questioning what is normal life anyway. You know,
I don't know. I was a philosophy professor, and then I went to do comedy. So like, I'm not the person to ask about what a normal life is.
Yeah, there's definitely some of my wife's friends I'm not allowed to talk to their kids, because the idea of telling children, oh yeah, I just basically started writing about video games. When I got bored of that, I decided to write comics instead. That's not a career path they want to know that exists.
No. Although maybe they should, because I didn't know my life was a series of like half measures until I eventually kind of had the guts. Not even the guts. I think I just it was super Freudian in like a way that's like almost laughable, where it's just like my unconscious was eventually screaming at me. And I like fell into doing, I fell out of academia and into doing comedy because I had no other choice at that point.
Yeah. You've got to be a bit, I mean, I hate to be that sort of talk about to be an artist, you must be compelled. But in some ways, it's like you can't help yourself. There's a bit like, because if you could do anything else other than this, you would. I found my dad was a builder, so I worked building sites as a kid growing up. So I've done real work, and that really taught me I'll be really bad at this. And I've got to find some way to cheat the system and not do this, you know?
Yeah. I've done everything from like work in supermarkets to work at an off-track betting place as like the clerk that gives people their tickets. Like I've worked some like bad jobs before, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is not, I mean, I guess I could if I was forced, if like there was no other choice and I had to put food on the table. There's plenty of things I could do, but it's not, I'm not good at them.
Yeah. I found myself, I did a science degree. That's my kind of background. And that really did teach me I don't want to do science. Even I really enjoy science, but the idea, the basic, as a sort of working class background kid, it's like, this feels like factory work. This is basically doing yes, I'm pipetting stuff, but that's kind of what you would do in a factory. And then you graduate, and then basically you tell other people what to pipette. And that's also not that exciting either. Yeah. So basically, my idea of being a scientist, I think, probably was, I want to be Dr. Doom. And that job doesn't exist.
Right. So. Right. There's no like building portals and things like that. It's just like sitting, looking at like a laser, hitting magnesium, taking some notes. And not even a note. I'm like miming writing in a notebook. It's not. It's like you look at some stuff on a computer and then you're like, okay. And you look at a chart. My friend's he got his PhD at MIT, and I once visited him there, and it was literally that. It was like normal science in the Thomas Kuhn kind of sense. Is just like taking notes and like seeing what happens, and then hopefully like getting an award or something.
So the weirdest thing I did, I helped dissect a human brain because we were researching schizophrenia. So we were running basically tests on brain samples. So the only time I helped take and freeze it, and that's interesting in that kind of like that's an anecdote, as in carrying a brain across campus of some. It was really because I entered all the people's biographies into the system, so this guy went for a normal operation, just a standard operation, and there was a complication, he just died. And 24 hours ago, he was thinking he was going home to his kids, and then next day he's being carried around a campus in a box by this British exchange student who has no idea what's going on. Life comes at you.
That's interesting. Do you think of that as a precursor at all? This is very, again, dumb armchair stuff, but like you're sitting there, you're getting your degree in science, and you're spending your days typing out the biographies of human beings. Like it doesn't seem like I'm not saying this is a linear thing, but it feels like that is like some kind of foundational thing to eventually being when you write characters, like having that inside you.
It's a bit. I'll tell you what it really is, because I mean that was only like a couple of weeks. What it really is exactly what you're saying. This is material. Like doing a different job like that gives you a completely different perspective. In that kind of, I've just read a really good book by Haley Campbell. It's just come out in the States. All the Living and the Dead, it's called, and she goes and interviews people death workers, like morticians and executioners, and people who prepare the dead, and people who clear up after plane accidents. And it's really powerful in that way. And it's a bit like that, as in the second you go a little bit behind the curtain, you can take something back, I guess. But I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. As in, if you've got a perspective on people, you think, oh, people are like this, and that's the way that life can be. And that's kind of like the radicalized empathy of writing. That's kind of what I think about the job, to be pretentious for a second. Like, it's a portal.
Yeah, I don't think that's pretentious. I think it is. I think if you're doing this job well, it is very much that.
I hope so. That's fingers crossed.
So, did you have an ambition to do science, or was it just that was like something that was that you thought that path was available to you coming from a working class background?
It was a bit like it's pretty much what you say, as in no one from my family had really been to like university before, so it was a bit like I should probably do something practical, but it was also like the absolute arrogance of 19-year-old me thinking, what do I need to do? I can read. I'm not, I'm always going to read books. I don't need to, do a degree in languages. I'll be doing that anyway. But you have no idea if you really like science till you do a degree in it. So like, hey, I like science. Do I like science enough? And the answer is no. But, it was it was Bath University, which is it's got no arts departments at all. So it's all just science and business and like various other language stuff. So it's a weird environment. And I end up becoming like, whatever the liberal edge of that university was. And I ended up sort of shaping it according to especially when I realized I wasn't going to do science. So the courses I did were like the philosophy of science, So all that kind of, that stuff, to be honest, which I found very easy. And like most science people don't really into that stuff. So I was sort of acing them, and then I could slack off and write fanzines and go to gigs, and you know what I mean? So like when I knew I wasn't out, I still got a 2-1, I got a decent enough degree. But I very much realized when it wasn't for me, it was like, I can shape this according to what I want it to be. And definitely like coming from a small town like Stafford, it was like, getting out was the least part of it as well. Mm-hmm. So, like what I got from the degree, I don't think was very much the degree, but the place at being at university and shaping it was. I got my first journalist job when at university. I was literally in a club, and a guy came up and asked me, do you want to write something for the magazine? Because that's not out of the blue. I was writing to the magazine as a reader, and they liked how I wrote. But I basically paid my way for my second year at university by writing reviews and tips for like old Amiga games. Weird life.
Did you have an ambition then? This is a thing I've been focused on a lot in the last year or so. Just thinking about people's like, what were your actual desires, and then how did those actually play out? How based on both like people's like economic backgrounds, their kind of like emotional backgrounds. Like, can you be honest with yourself about your own ambitions when you're, either a child or a teenager? I'm really curious.
Like, I know what you mean there. This is like I'm 46 now. So it's like, this is all in the distant past, but I'm always really chewing up the what ifs of it. Like, by this point, I'd already actually got a job at this magazine, Amiga Power. But I was reading a book called England Streaming by John Savage, which is who's a British music journalist. It's really good. It's a history of British punk. And there's a bit where he describes he's at work, he's in the toilets at work, and he's putting together his fanzine to, I can quote the line, it's something like, letting the A-bombs in my head out, And that's like, and there's a moment of reading that and recognition in the kind of like, oh, right, you're allowed to do that. Oh, and especially the way I feel about the world, this is normal. And John Savage took that and turned it into his life. And so immediately, permission that, even though I was already a professional writer, I could think about myself in this way because he did. And you know what I mean? And whenever, I don't do a lot of stuff with like secondary school kids, but the few times I have, it's been especially people who are like not necessarily aware it's an option, making sure people know it's an option. It's the opposite of what I was telling earlier about my wife's friends' kids. like knowing that, oh yeah, if you see an escape route, because it's not, because the thing about like me wanting to be a music journalist and a games journalist and a writer is because I really wanted to do it, and I also saw how it worked, because I think like, and I worked at it, I really tried to work on my craft, and it was always about like, oh, I can see this, I'm gonna have to completely take apart everything in these reviews and books and see how it works. It was never quite casual and daydreaming. It was obsessive, and like, even as now I'm a comic book writer, a lot of the critics still in there. I'm somebody who is deconstructionary, and they're kind of like, if we return to the image of me helping take a brain apart, it's a bit like that. Okay, let's take this apart and see how it works, and then we can learn something. Yeah. I think it's like it's. I mean, I say working. I don't want to oversell my working class background. It's not like I was raised by wolves. But, it's like, the fact we weren't like hyper poor or anything. But, it was never like we were fine. But at the same time, the idea that we never knew anyone who was a writer. We did like, the idea. I remember when I first discovered there's a writer from my hometown, a writer called Storm Constantine, who is this gothic, a horror fantasy writer. That was immediately, oh wait, writers can come from here, and also writers in books which I am reading can come from here. I mean, it's just sort of seeing the escape, and just a lot of my work, especially my indie work, is about that. The idea of like the ability to see the world is also how it limits, which of course that's something I picked up from 1984. The language is a cage, but also like the cage is around us at all times, and like if you can work out a way to sort of like navigate that cage, you can perhaps not be eaten by the Minotaur. That metaphor went bad, but you know what I mean?
I get it. I'm constantly, my metaphors are I'm like starting off strong, and then like about 3/4 of the way through, I'm like, why am I suddenly referencing like a Assyrian gods or something? I don't know what's happening here.
Man.
No, I get you. Here's a question though. Is there actually more? I have this picture in my mind that like class structures in the UK are more solid than I think they are. I actually think there seems to be, the more that I talk to folks from the UK, the more it seems like there are a lot of people from like working class backgrounds. I've talked to like professors and writers and musicians who come from working class backgrounds and then moved up, versus here in the United States, it seems much more. Even though the myth of the United States is that like anyone can make it, I don't think that's true. I really think that it's like really kind of solid here. It seems a little more fluid in the UK, but I'm curious if that's just, it happens to be like the people I talk to, or if do you see that there being any kind of like that being an actual thing?
I think the short answer is complicated. Because it's like, I mean, the thing I always try to explain to like American friends is class in America is about money. And it's not about money. Class in the UK isn't about money. Like class is about social values and what you'd spend the money on, and like that. So in other words, it's all complicated. One of the things I always say was, I am aware that. Sorry, my brain's gone blank. What's something I'm aware of is I didn't really realise I was properly working class until I went to university, and suddenly I was exposed to people in a completely different. Oh no, you. Oh, these are middle class people, and they're I remember like I did my degree in Bath. This slightly this somewhat a fat gentleman. I was treated by various people like a bit of rough, clearly dating to sort of annoy their parents. You know what I mean? Like I only really became aware of this kind of that stuff when I was exposed to it more. So like class is quite often invisible because you don't often even think about it in that way. As in, it's just the stuff you don't like. Even the idea of it being an option.
Mm-hmm.
Is there. I'm also aware that if you talk about mobility, it's like I think across my lifetime it's got less rather than more. Like I mean, like I was aware I got a grant when I went to university, so I got given some money which I didn't have to pay back. I had to take out a loan as well, but like that disappeared through the 90s quite quickly.
Yeah,
and I'm very aware that like the question I always ask myself is, if I was like 19 now, would I go to university, or would I be able to go to university? And the answer to that I think might be no. Like, if everything else was, so in other words, it depends. Yeah, it's certainly it's more fluid than you'd think, I think, because especially in the arts, there's a lot of mashing of cultures. Like it's high and low, it always goes together.
Yeah.
But sure. I think the brute financial realities of it are oppressive. Especially like the thing that always throws me is, of course, is unpaid internships and stuff like that. Like only middle class kids, like when I was getting into magazines, that wasn't there. So so the idea that you actually go and intern for free and therefore could get a job there wasn't there. And even then, I was like the only kid in my magazine, PC Gamer, was at the time, who went to a non-selective school. I was the only went to an actual comp for like a lot of the time on that magazine, and everyone else went to some kind of like single sex or grammar school or private school. And I'm like, it is still kind of here.
Yeah. When I first moved to New York, a lot of the people that I knew had internships at like The Onion, and they were not paid. I'm just like, how are you? I could not understand how they could afford to do that. And I was like, whatever job I could get to survive, I would just grab whatever it was. Whether it was like I was like delivering stuff like for a temp agency. I was delivering things for this. So the temp agency hired me, and then I like would deliver items to other temp agencies. I really don't understand how it worked, but like it was stuff like that. And then you kind of see how like that starts to, they get a leg ahead because they were able to afford this unpaid internship. But the other thing that I think that's interesting about what you said is like, I think that class in America used to be about those kind of like invisible rules. Cause I remember growing up that like, I was scared of like family friends who were wealthy, like in a kind of like not conscious way, because they had certain rules that I didn't understand. And I had to like, when I would go to their houses, I would have to suddenly like try to figure out the rules that they operated by. And then as I've gotten older, it's become more like our ruling elite in America is like the most nouveau riche. They're the worst people. They have the worst taste. I would be okay with like old blue blood type ruling elite. Like I don't have a choice either way who is pulling the strings, who is calling the shots. However, if they had better taste, I think I would be okay with it a little bit more than I am.
You got a bit, especially when you see someone who's really rich and what they choose to spend it on. It's just a bit embarrassing. Like I remember, like when I was a games journalist, there was a guy called Lord British who was he designed games like Ultima and stuff, and he just like he spent his money on interesting random crap. Like Sputniks they didn't send to space and secret passageways through the house. And it's like, yeah, this is the kind of mad, if you throw money, you have to buy mad crap. You don't just buy a nice sports car and a few jumpers and a weird statue. Like buy mad crap and embrace your eccentricities.
There was some video that Elon Musk took in his kitchen, and it was the grossest looking kitchen in the world. It was just like in terms of decorating, like, and I don't really have a lot of a graphic design ability. I don't have a lot of I don't understand how to decorate your house very well outside of like looking at a catalog for West Elm or something like that. So I don't have like any kind of innate ability, but even I could tell that this is like the most badly designed kitchen in the world.
Oh man.
What was it like growing up in Stafford? I really don't know much about it.
Like it's a small town. It's like I don't want to overstate how bad it is because it's not like there's definitely worse places to come. It's like a Midlands town, which basically is Peaky Blinders land. For those, that's the great joy of Peaky Blinders is suddenly there's like a load more Midlands accents on television, and then somehow people think they're cool, which ain't true 20 years ago. It's kind of like people talk about the North and the South. The Midlands is neither. Like I always remember, like talking about university, like pretty much the first week of university, they divided into a North-South thing, and there was two Midlanders, and we weren't allowed to join either group. You know what I mean? Okay. But it wasn't because we were in Midlands. It's like the South people thought we were North, and the North people thought we were South. You know what I mean? The thing about what about the Midlands? It's ex-industrial. It's Birmingham is like the big city nearby, which we used to view as the most magical place on earth, but it's the second biggest city in the UK, and it's not really culturally seen in the same way like Manchester or Liverpool. It's metal, it's a metal heartland. There's that's kind of like if you want to imagine like being a teenager there, you've kind of passed out. You're given like a Black Sabbath album at the age of 11 or whatever. It's actually weirdly, it's the British home of RPGs. There's so many role-playing game countries like Games Workshop. That's where the Midlands are. Stafford itself,
interesting.
You know what I mean? It's like if you imagine that's the Midlands vibe. I'm just guessing there's other sides. Like the whole Midlands also like Northern Soul, but that's a completely different story. I won't go into. Stafford it was a good place to grow up, bring up kids, I think, but like not necessarily a good place to be a kid because it was just a bit boring. It's funny. I can't. It's so difficult to actually describe because it just feels quite blank in that way. Like if you're gonna set something there, it's like I did a comic called Die, and there's several scenes set in Stafford, and that's the closest I've ever got to actually writing about it. And it's quite weird. It's like, I said earlier about things what have I not mind? I've written relatively few stories in Stafford. Like Die was the only one, and Die is about going to a fantasy world which isn't Stafford. Like almost everything I've written is like inspired by post leaving Stafford. You know what I mean? Because in some ways I kind of think my life started at 19 in that way. Like I don't recognise myself as a teenager much, except in embarrassment. And I was in university. There's this one guy who, the classic turn up on first day, and he decided to go full goth. You know, like he was you've seen his photos before. He was just like a normal kid, and it's like, no, I'm going to go full on, and he just completely reinvented himself. And I was never that, but like off the leash of Stafford and the kind of the expectations of who people thought I was, I got to explore and discover bits of myself much quicker. And I was like, one of my friends. Like the first time we were like in Amsterdam getting stoned or whatever, and I was ranting some random theory out, and he sort of paused and said, "Kieron, you've always sort of talked like this, but now you actually have the vocabulary to actually say what you were trying to say." So you know what I mean? Like the idea, like it's almost like Eliza Doolittle myself. I feel some kind of like vaguely punk rock indie kid version of like Pygmalion, which is just to think about.
Yeah, I didn't have that's the thing until I started like therapy. I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate anything. And then suddenly someone's giving me the words and I'm just like, oh, that's what that is. I just thought it was some like kind of inchoate state I was in. And now I have and the same thing with philosophy, like studying philosophy gave me the existential vocabulary to describe things in a way that I'm like reading Heidegger and I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought that was just like some like weird floating mood. But no, there's actual like people have discussed this before in history.
It's useful. Like I think getting into the music press for me and the games press to a lesser degree was just really useful because I described like the music press used to be a liberal education for arts. Sorry. The music press used to be a liberal education for working class kids, like all those really pretentious writers, dropping their philosophy and whatever. And it's like I only heard about situationalism until I read it in the music press, or bits of Nietzsche or whatever. So in other words, like this was like a good crash course of stuff they just didn't teach me in school, And it was all, and it wasn't like complete, but it was definitely starting places. It was kind of like, and also the implication that this is stuff you could learn, and stuff that is useful and interesting and actually adds to your life. Especially when I was reading the music press, these people this is how I wanted to think and talk about stuff. The idea that, oh no, this is the way you can see the world and you can get paid for it.
So do you see like those years before before 19, let's say if that's the dividing line in your life, right? Before 19 and after 19, like, is there anything kind of like going on in there that's like pushing you in a certain direction? Like things you see in your parents or like the people around you, or just like what is actually shaping you in that kind of like, I don't know what you want to call it, the blank time, the beige time, something like that.
Yeah. I don't think that's like, I think other people would probably describe, I think I was a weirder kid. Like I think almost everyone says, oh, I was a weird kid. But I think in retrospect, I look at some stuff and think you can sort of see where I was coming from. I mean, there's like, you could just choose random anecdotes and it's like, there's something shaping there. I mean, the one I took my mum to San Diego Comic-Con in that kind of like, after my dad died, like it was like, mum said, I want to see what you guys actually do. So we said, great, we'll take to San Diego Comic-Con. You see one con, see this. So we got her on stage during our spotlight panel and got people to ask her questions. And she was very funny. My mum is like sharp and funny. And she made the Comic-Con Wick Div, everyone dies in 2 years. And someone asked her like, who's your favourite character in Wick Div? And she's like, well, they're all going to die. It's not really worth getting attached, is it? And the entire room is. But the anecdote she said was like, I wrote a story like when a teen, like 6 or 7 or whatever it was. And it's basically starts with you follow this fish and the fish is swimming for the water. And then it's like, and then you realize the fish is swimming and looking for his mummy. You can't find his mummy anywhere. And then you realize, oh, he's not actually a fish. It's a baby whale looking for its mummy. And then you realize it can't find its mummy because it's been killed by a whaler. And this baby fish is going to be swimming through this ocean forever. And that kind of, like, mum and dad were in tears reading this on the wall. And that's like, let's be honest, that's my basic story structure, even now. You know what I mean? Like, and there's other bits like. Actually, here's another anecdote I might tell about myself. You see myself becoming. There was this bit where you're meant to be testing a kid this one kid had to basically do a thing where spelling tests people. So in other words, the structures. What she's going to say a word, then the other people are meant to spell the word aloud, and she ever says something is right or something is wrong. And like she's doing this in some kind of public event, so like the entire class practices, and everybody else does it properly. Like she does the word, they spell it, she says well done, and I just spelled it completely and utterly wrong, deliberately so. And she clearly panicked. And of course, what I was doing is like, I want you to test the other one. That this isn't meant to be us being good. This is about something else. And that slight awkwardness in terms of like, let's test the system, that's always been there. So you see the me, but like, I don't think I was aware of the me. As in like, I saw myself, I didn't really see myself as a being. I was much more like, I just say like a flesh zombie. But it feels like I was acting. There's so much of me was acting on instinct. There's just this kind of like the ability to like conceive of yourself as a person was perhaps not there in the same way. This is really cool. This might just because my memory's gone now, but like it just feel like I was looking for myself and ways to describe myself, which is interesting. Like, and I was like, one day I may just write something intensely about that because you pick stuff apart, but it's much more like where it led rather than what it was in the moment. So that hurt noise is how I'm feeling as well. It's like, this has gone deep. This has gone deeper than I thought.
Well, this is I'm just trying to figure out. It seems like you were like some kind of like unbridled id in some way, just kind of like feeling things out. And what I was thinking was that, was more me trying to be like, well, when did your ego coalesce then? When did you, capital Y, you become, as opposed to this kind of like flesh zombie or whatever that is just like testing boundaries and seeing like where, like, because when you said that, it seemed like it was like you were like trying to figure out where are your own boundaries, either emotional or existential, right? In comparison with these other people, like almost like Cartesian, right? Where you're like, do they have minds too? I wonder.
Yeah, I would say it's like, I think about that point, I feel I was trying to be helpful in this kind of like, I can see what we're meant to be doing here, and like, this is what the system is, and that's interesting. So the mind body stuff. I think my so-called the super ego, the whole kind of repression stuff is pretty strong with me. Like I kind of, I was raised Catholic, so there's a lot, guilt and redemption. That's all I'm about. And these are kind of like really, the last couple of years I've been really examining my Catholicism and how that affected me, and how it traces stuff in work, stuff I find emotionally powerful. I realized, this is ethically Catholic. It's like, I got to the whole study properly like a few years ago, and I couldn't work out, like, I'm not really like, it's been a long time since I've been into like a white male rock band as much as I have been. And I was trying to work out why on earth is this hitting me so hard? Obviously I like clubs and drinking and like all that stuff. That stuff resonates, but it's Catholic. The entire second album is just full on Catholicism. And all like, even Lord of the Rings. I've never thought about the fact that Tolkien was Catholic and the ethics of Lord of the Rings are Catholic until quite recently, and how that hit me. And Lord of the Rings, means more to me than the Bible does. And even a band like Kinnicky, who were this like minor indie punk band from the UK, which meant everything to me and Jamie. Jamie being my artist on various books. They were Catholic, and they were writing intensely Catholic songs about like shame and sin and going out and drinking a lot. And it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like you sort of see it in my work at the moment that there's a lot going on in terms of like that. Like not that I was ever that religious either, but it was just like religion was something that permeated everything, and it's still kind of in my DNA. I remember like my wife, we went to the Vatican. And I'm atheist. I'm officially atheist. My wife is actually atheist. I've got all manner of bits of weird coding still. So I went to the St. Peter's tomb, and I was just started genuflecting, and doing crossing and lighting candles. And my wife clearly thought I'd been taken over by a rogue spirit or something, because my brain sort of broke in that way. So I know it's just a random body they put in a box. I know that's true, but if it's not that, this guy, the guy in that box, knew that guy who was on the cross, and my brain just basically clearly lit on fire over it. It's interesting.
Well, there's something. I think there's like a. I don't really mean this when I'm about to say, but I think there's a field generated by the intense beliefs of people in a certain area. Because when I visited, when I was in, I don't know where's St. Francis? Where's the tomb of St. Francis? I remember visiting that, and I could feel. I'm Jewish, and I'm fairly an atheist, if anything. Like I'm sure there's like a couple like questions like what happened before the Big Bang, but like for all intents and purposes, I'm mostly an atheist, right? And there was a reverence I felt going in there, even though I had no belief. I wasn't even raised in any kind of Catholicism at all, except for some friends. Right. I think there's something when you have like so many people concentrated in a certain area, like the vibe. I hate that word, but I think it's so appropriate. The energy.
No, it's like, you're right. It's like a good gig. You know what I mean? Like when the crowd's electric, it's like, art and religion. They're basically the same thing.
Which I mean, you've obviously written about. So like, it's, I mean, but like, when you were growing up, was it an intentional thing or was it an instinctual thing? Like guilt and shame that comes along with Catholicism, right? Did you kind of like instinctually move in certain directions, or were you like, well, the Bible says this, so I have to do? Was about more the rules, or was about more the feeling that comes along with it?
I think there's a lot of feelings, and especially because like a lot of it's looking around the practice. It's like my mum and dad. Like my mum is Church of Scotland, but it's like, we've got 2 kids, so obviously we're Catholic, but not that Catholic. Like there's clearly contraception in this house. And I always remember like I think any Catholic kid feels sorry. Any relatively sensitive Catholic kid ends up feeling sorry for Judas. You know what I mean? Like, he had to do it. The whole, he's kind of got a bum rap, all that kind of. So those, I must say, if I had to sum up my sort of relationship with Catholicism, especially early on, and also this is another Yiddish thing, and also not sort of seeing what's going on and not quite getting it. Like my first day of school, you remember those books you had, which like lines of paper with a picture on top. You have to draw a picture and line. Okay, I was asked to draw. It's like the miracle of walking on the water. And I did this, and I just drew Jesus water skiing. I wasn't trying to be blasphemous, but it's that kind of like, clearly walking on the water, evidently water skiing. That's what I mean. Like there's a pricking at things, and I think it's instinctively puckish, I guess, because it doesn't necessarily mean anything bad by it, but it's that kind of like the sort of like, I'm doing this. Obviously, anyone listening won't be able to see my eyes, but I'm sort of doing that sort of squinting and that kind of like, you sure? I think it's like, definitely when I think instinctive is a good word to describe it. There's just a lot of like feeling, I guess. There's like the thing is, I think in retrospect, I think I was more charismatic as a child than I had any idea at the time. And that's not weird. I made shit up and dragged my friends along to do it. I can't and that must have mean that they wanted to follow me into this nonsense I'd made up.
I know exactly what you're saying. And the minute I became self-aware, the minute my ego asserted itself, then all that went away, because I was now looking at myself from outside myself and judging, and I'm just like, oh no. And like, now I have to if I have a business meeting or something like that, or I'm pitching something, I literally have to summon up charismatic Andy, which I now call business Andy, because I have to, because now I'm this other person that doesn't feel right anymore. Like I have to put on the skin of this person.
So I want to say, okay, it's a little bit like a comedian. Anyone who gets on stage, like I wear slightly different clothes at cons. Like I'm aware I'm performing Kieron Gillen. And especially one of my friends recently followed me. I was working for a bar, and obviously at a con at a bar, this is like 4 or 5 years ago now. Especially me, as somebody who's quite a famous writer, you move in the bar, you're talking to a lot of people. It's really full on. It's you're giving big energy. And I step outside and just stop and give a huge sigh. and this person was following, saw that, and they had no idea how on earth do you do it in that, and they realized it wasn't just natural. It was something, it was something I was choosing to do rather than something that actually was quote unquote normally full on me.
Well, it's there in you, right? It's not like it's like you are a psychopath, like totally
no.
adopting another. It's there. It's just that it's like your natural energy level just doesn't go there, right? It just settles at a different place at this point. Once the ego became involved and you became self-aware and the id kind of just like got under control, then now it's just like, how do I get the id out in certain ways?
It's that and it's part of it's the game of it. I mean, this is one reason why I like role playing games. You get to in fact, why you like writing. You're playing with different parts of your personality. You turn bits up, you turn bits down, because it's every writer in the world says, which your characters are you, and they're all you. Obviously, they're all you. That's the entire point. But it's still true though. It's annoying. It's like that's the worst things people say about writing, which everyone says and are true. The worst thing, because I hate them, because it's like you want to pick them apart and find the flaw, or like what I do anyway.
Because you're growing up at a time like punk is big in the US, like hardcore is big. I don't know how much of that is like getting back over to the UK, but like, is any of that leaking into you? Because what it seems like when you were younger was there was this kind of like defiance in some way.
Yeah, I think I was like, my family was never particularly wasn't usually political. Like, and it's weird because obviously it's the 80s, the miners' strikes going on, and it was a big deal in Cannock. I occasionally think, so obviously it's incredibly bad for huge bits of the working class, but since my dad was a builder, I think the 80s were pretty good for builders. So like there's a kind of that experience changes things a little there. And I think my political awareness really came in quite a lot later, like circa, I think almost a secondary school, like at primary school. I always remember basically, I think in primary school, we sort of had a sort of dream-like. I'm basically, in this conversation, I'm basically presenting myself as some kind of elfin creature. But like, I went, like at primary school, it was a convent school. So the headmistress was a nun. So like, it's classic Catholic, and it's surrounded by these gardens. And I create this whole kind of fantasy universe of like all the buildings you could see in the gardens you weren't allowed to go to. Oh yeah, this is where the hobgoblins live, and these are where the elves live, and all that. And I still believe that to some degree when I went to secondary school for the day visit. But then it just all disappeared the second I went to secondary school. Suddenly it became urban realism. So some of it, and a lot of it's just the British pop music, especially then, worked quite differently. Because my understanding of America is that everything moves slowly because it's so big, it's state by state, and British bands trying to break America, not many of them pull it off because they're not very good at the long haul tours or whatever. Whilst the UK, stuff moves quickly. Like, right. And you're walking down the street and you hear music from different windows as it was. And you get stuff like, when the Clash was getting into reggae and all that kind of stuff happened very quickly because everything's very close together. And if an idea happens, it's dropped and then you hear it in all the same clubs and then it builds out. That's why Britain has been so fertile. It's just a scale thing. Like, it's much easier to go from Bristol to London than it is to go from, Chicago to LA,
Yeah.
And that has always been there. So you're always kind of exposed to a lot of stuff. And that kind of is the, my Catholic understanding of music culture definitely comes from that, I think. But it's sort of like, I was definitely into like nerd stuff much earlier than I was like cool stuff. Let's define those two poles of the personality. Like, proper nerd stuff was primary school. Like my understanding of music wasn't in the same place. It was just stuff I liked. And by the time sort of I head into secondary school, I start being aware of like what bands mean. Like, I got into heavy metal first because I was a Midlander, and then I segued for a sort of goth stage and ended up the sort of like vague indie kid when I started buying the music press. But like, there became more of an awareness of what this stuff does, and through that, since music is more about the world, made me more aware of, like, you can't buy Public Enemy without starting to understand like race in America a bit. Or it's trying to, like as much as anyone in Britain can at that point. You know what I mean? Like, these pop bands are worlds in and of themselves and makes you kind of look at the world in a different way. And whilst, as much as I said that Tolkien is about Catholicism, Tolkien is also about orcs. It's not the same thing.
What was like getting you about those things? Was it just about escaping like the Midlands, like, whether it was like playing a role-playing game or reading, Lord of the Rings or whatever?
Like, I must admit, like, at primary school, I don't think I thought much about escape. I think I was just excited at the possibilities and the idea of like imagination being this incredibly powerful thing. At secondary school, it probably became more about. And I also was quite aware that many of the reasons why I like pop music are the same reason I like role-playing games. Or like, these are all kind of fantasy universes which you get to reinvent yourself. And that's why, what's becoming a metalhead, like, you're a standard sort of nerdy kid, and then you kind of, put on a Megadeth t-shirt and a big pendant, and suddenly you might be trouble. Like that's kind of like cosplay. And, so all this stuff sort of ties together for me, I think. If I go back earlier, you just see a sort of like, I do end up very rapidly hitting a sense of wonder. Like that's a weird word to use, but it's
it's great.
This is just really exciting, especially like, my age specifically. I think I'm as young as you could. I wasn't like first wave D&D, but I was definitely like first wave crossover. So like, I remember like when stuff started happening and it was, no one really knew what it was. And like being really intrigued. Like when I got to Games Workshop, you had to basically like phone them up or write to them and they sent you a catalogue, on big A4s, big A1, A2 sheets. That kind of like almost, actually it's closer to being a record collector than anything else at that stage. So it was illicit and like I think like anyone really younger listening to this and they've got, I don't know, Critical Role or whatever, the idea of how difficult it was to get into role-playing games. It wasn't even like gatekeeping. It was like you had to go on an adventure down a dungeon to even find the rule book.
Yeah. By the time I'm only a little younger than you, but by the time I was old enough, it was already in like comic book stores. You would go there and there'd be a whole section of like boxes of role-playing games. I remember. Yeah,
actually, here's a good way to. You asked what Stafford's like. There was no comic book shop. There was no like proper game shop. But like it just stuff wasn't. That's why we love Birmingham. If we actually wanted our proper like nerd stuff or music stuff or fashion stuff, you have to go to Birmingham because Stafford just didn't have it. And that's kind of like the. This is why it was quite hard to describe Stafford because I define it by its absence. And I think that, that's one reason why stuff like fantasy stuff and is so alive for me because it's just the idea that the world can be different. I mean, this is a sort of standard rant. Like I quite like fantasy, not just as an escape. It's also a transformation. Like what I like about the Marvel universe is it's about looking at the Earth and imagining, Spider-Man flying past the window. It's imagining the world in a different, it's one. So I remember when parkour like broke, and like immediately what excited about parkour was, this is an art form born of people who are kind of in an environment that's meant to be a prison. These are like urban city blocks which are meant to be prisons to hold them, and it's like no, let's look at them as a playground. And that philosophical break of seeing the world in a different way for me, that's fantasy. That kind of like, and that's what the power of fantasy is. And I think about my old role playing games. Obviously, I'm playing characters as escapism, but also playing characters as exploring bits myself. It's one of those things people say about RPGs is like, which character, which person's about to come out based upon the characters they're choosing to play. Like who's trans in this? I mean, that's in DICE a core thing. It's about using characters to explore parts of yourself and discover parts of yourself. So like, when I was a game critic, I used to have one of my themes was like the utilitarianism of games. The idea that, it's fun, but also the games you choose serve a purpose in your life. And sometimes it's just like, I need a distraction for 5 minutes. But like, if you only got 5 minutes, that's something about your life. I wrote like one of my favorite articles I did was about heartbreak games. The ideas of like, what games do you play when you've broken up with somebody? Like, what do you do when you like, open up the red wine, start listening to Nick Cave? What do you play? In my case, Planescape Torment.
It is almost like therapy. It is there's almost a therapeutic component to that. In that, like, kind of like transforming, both like discovering parts of yourself, right, without having like someone stand or sit across from you and just be like, so what does this mean or whatever, right? There's almost that kind of component of it. Do you think that there was a therapeutic component for you in playing role-playing games when you were younger?
Yeah, or at least an exploratory one. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's not even then now, I still like explore parts of myself. And it's kind of telling, I find the characters I choose to play as I get older, like, or like what stuff I kind of hit up now by first instinct. I think absolutely. And it's what it's for, because it's, games are magic circles. It's literally, form magic circle, and this isn't real, but at the same time kind of is. And like, and we're gonna promise to be with each other. We won't abandon each other. You know what I mean? There's something really magically precious about that. And of course, this is not stuff I would have understood. No, it's not true. It's not stuff I would have been able to express when I was 16, but I certainly got it. You know what I mean? Because it's why we're doing it.
So when do you think your self-awareness actually did start to come in?
I think it grew. I think it just grew across my teens. I think definitely me starting to read the music press was a big deal. I think maybe when I started going clubbing even, because in the UK, obviously drinking age is younger, and you're probably doing some drinking before that. I always remember I think it's I don't want to say my family unit stunted my growth as a human being or anything, but I feel as a teenager, when I started doing stuff outside what was expected, you got just by going places, you got to see more of yourself, I think. I don't know. I don't view myself as solidified me until I left for university. I think that for me is at some point in that period I solidified, and it might even be so I worked for a year in America in a lab. That was part of my degree. That year might have been a really big moment for me. I think in terms of it was a bad year because I was trapped in not trapped is a strong word, but I didn't have a car, and it wasn't anywhere nearby. I was really isolated for a long period of time. The people who I worked with were great, but they were all obviously significantly older. So I was very lonely. And that's also the year I discovered myself online. I kind of started, blogging a lot more. And obviously it was before blogs, but I ran various websites, and I was I played online role-playing games or whatever, the text-based mushes or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I really had nothing going on. But I also discovered myself as a writer then. I was always writing before, and obviously I was a paid writer before. So, but really, the amount of words I wrote in that year was obscene. And I think something Alan Moore said. I think that one of the really good things about writing, at least I think, is if you do it right, you become. As you say, it's a therapeutic aspect to it. You do know yourself better. I've always felt more sure of myself as a human being when I put something down on paper. If something's if I can't sleep, and there's things that keep me awake for nights after nights, stop, I'll write an essay and I'll get it down, and that allows me to step away, and at least I can see what my thoughts are. And it's one of the things writing it down makes you solidify, and you can immediately kind of, okay, what's wrong with this? And that allows that I become of a firmer conception of myself. So almost this, and this is going a bit Grant Morrison for a second. I do sometimes feel I wrote myself into existence. That's the kind of that's writing is just writing is condensed thought, sublimated ideas onto paper. And in a real way, that I didn't know what I was until I wrote it down, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it, because in your head, for some people, this is not all people, but this is definitely my experience, was that it was just all kind of a jumble. And I was a jumble of, there was a me. It wasn't I was just a kind of blob that would fit into whatever kind of situation, right? There was a me, but it wasn't a coalesced me until I remember the moment that I moved to New York to start doing comedy, and how I settled in that moment. It really I remember I was walking in Greenpoint, and it just hit me what I was doing, and everything kind of settled in a way it hadn't before. And so that resonated with me on a very deep level, because I understand what you were talking about. It was being able to figure all this stuff out and have it solidify in you just gives you a kind of sense of peace in a way I didn't have it before.
Yeah, I feel a line I used to say about myself: I'm stable like a gyroscope. As in, if I keep on spinning, I basically operate. And that's sometimes it's still true now in terms of the work, as in things stabilize me. But at the same time, exactly like you say, the idea that I feel much more at peace. And trust it, the disturbing things is when your life gets unhinged, and then you lose yourself. I remember when my dad died, I was in a complete mess for several years. I kind of definitely feel to have lost a secure mooring of my own identity. I had to essentially reconstruct myself a little after that, and that's when I went to therapy for the first time. And I've been in therapy since, which was really useful for me. And I kind of wish I'd done it years before. But the weird fog of consciousness. This is damn much speaks to my age as a British person, especially with the sort of theory that was going around. Like, I don't really get authenticity I get it on a cultural level, but I don't get it on a personal level. I'm not sure what the authentic me is. Which bit of me is authentic? Like, is it the bit where I'm talking to you now in this way, or is it the bit where I'm playing with Iris, or is it like how much is not that all these performances are real, but like what does it say about the hologram that is inside of each of us? Like, that's kind of like that's a lot of phonogram in there, I think. So.
Yeah. I think, where do you feel at peace? Like, you're in these different roles right now. You're like a parent, you're a writer, you're a husband, right? You're a friend, whatever. Wherever you still feel at peace, I think is the authentic you. Like, if you were like, again, when you were like performing some version of you that's not natural necessarily.
That's interesting. It's also, that's a good argument. I like it. It's also tautological in terms of whether you know what I mean. Like the tautology of that bugs me slightly. In that kind of like, whatever you're most comfortable, it's you. And like, I'm not sure I'd go along with that. I think it's like kind of whether you're most comfortable is just a good place to be. Like, I would say utility for the utility of that is it's just look for where you're most comfortable because that's not comfortable. I think that's but you're right. I mean. At the moment, I feel like I'm in a good place. I mean, really, I'm really tired a lot.
Sure.
And I'm glad I don't have to write the entire Marvel crossover again. But like, that was foolish. Why did I do that? But that kind of like, this is. I genuinely like. I feel I've written myself to a better place, whatever that means. Which is nice because, like, I'm still weird and death obsessed and like all that. But I genuinely think there's a calmness more me to now, which is nice. Like, I think I still speak, actually here, I speak quickly, but I think I speak less quickly, less often, that kind of stuff. Now, this has got very soothing. It's like, I'm going to go down and just sort of like...
Let me make an addendum. If you are putting on a skin that feels icky, that is not the authentic you. If you were trying to, like, okay, here's the example. I thought I really liked ska. When I was 17, I really got into ska. And like, I would go to like indie ska shows, and I would put on a suit, or at least a tie, and a little like pork pie cap thing. And it turned out I just liked horns. The minute that I heard like Neutral Milk Hotel, and I was like, oh, you can put horns in indie rock songs, then I stopped. It's not that I'm not like one of those people that like abhors ska, but I just don't. It's not for me. And putting on that, I was just trying out that skin. It just didn't feel right at all. It felt like I was wearing like a something itchy, if that makes sense.
There was a year at university where I wore a lot of color. That's the only way to describe it. As in, like, I'm going to try wearing color now. And no, I gravitated back to this comfortable black shadow you see before me. Mm-hmm. I think, like, you're right. Like, I think it's one thing. You can definitely tell things which aren't you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, the multitude that is me includes this, and this. Doesn't include that. Like, I find those kind of things, that's really interesting.
You are defined more by you, capital U, not just you, but like you are defined more by absences, by blank spaces. You're a constellation, right? You are outlined in some way, and you know what isn't you. We're all just these. We're all just these. We're the blobs from The Prisoner, whatever that thing is.
the rover.
Yeah.
So I think it's like it's more like Nebula. I think these are the points, but they're soft edges. Yes. You know, like I think there's like, weird, incredibly complicated Venn diagrams in existence.
Yeah. Wait, can I ask one writing question? Just because you brought it up and it just struck me. When you're writing a giant story, like Judgment Day, right? Mm. How do you actually, what the nuts and bolts, how do you actually go about conceiving of something that is that large? Because the most I've ever, I wrote my first movie last year, and that's the largest project I've ever done. And it was just more like where I'm just like, oh, I literally just wrote out the story. Like, I made the outline. I just wrote the story. I'm like, what makes sense for this? I thought about it in two ways. One is, what are the moves the characters make? And then how does the world change, and then change how those characters think. But that was, again, that was like, it was fairly linear. Just reading so far, it seems like any crossover seems sprawling. And I'm wondering how do you in your brain actually conceive of that?
It's like in your gut, you see structure. For me, it's like structure. Obviously, I'm quite structural as a writer, but you kind of also know. So like when I was like, okay, let's start with this inciting incident. So I've looked at all the Avengers and X-Men and Eternals, and okay, why are they going to go to war? Because that's pretty much, I know there's going to be that. And I've already got that between the Eternals and the X-Men anyway. So how can this play out in a slightly different way? And then it's like, then it's like, of course, we won't be just at the start. And it's like, and how will everyone in the Marvel universe respond to this? That's what I think. Then he says, okay, who are we going to follow? And, so I generated much more material than I needed, then chose a story which is like the path through it. And then the story which was interesting, which isn't the main path, became the tie-ins, which became a kind of a fractal, like Rashomon almost effect. That's what I think is like, that's what crossover is, this weird kind of like symphony writing. Like, so no, you all this kind of, you're thinking all of it once. That's how I did it. And it's much like, it's quite hard to describe, especially because I just don't want to, because the other is quite practical. The other bit's quite practical because you're thinking, okay, what other stories can other people write? So the entire second act of Judgment Day, which is sort of, okay, first act is this Eternals X-Men war with the Avengers trying to stop it. So that's obvious. We're going to we plan out what the attacks are. Like, okay, there's going to be an attack on Mars. That means Al will probably want to do a tie-in. So that's kind of side. The second act is basically everyone on Earth has to justify themselves, or the planet explodes. Not quite. Okay, basically, the whole thing's kind of a climate change metaphor. But okay, and this means that everyone tying in can do obviously a story about everything that's going on, but also it's like you get to do an individual story about your character. So like the Spider-Man story is basically, can Spider-Man justify himself? And that is a way of basically fungible, making the story fungible. So this is more like a story prompt to other writers. Now I can then answer that, use that story prompt on my own work. So I say, okay, which characters do I want to force to justify themselves? And that's now major parts of my story along the way as well. And then you kind of, okay, at the end of Judgment, that's probably the start of the third act when he makes a decision of thumbs up or thumbs down. So in some ways, you do the really high level, then you work out the smaller level. And for me, I'm quite practical. You see this book called Uber, which is like a very mechanical World War II comic. And a lot of it's just trying to be sensible. So for me, it's like a lot of me is, okay, if you're really trying to defeat the X-Men in a war, what would you do?
Right.
So, and issue 3 of X, which is out next week at the moment of recording, it's like, okay, if an alien celestial appeared and said, can you justify the Earth or destroy it? Okay, what would the heroes of Earth actually do to begin with?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's my first, and then of course it probably goes awry somehow. But like, you know what I mean? That's for me is like, it's always like, what would be, and then you're thinking on the biggest top level, like the one line, like you can describe World War I in a sentence if you wanted, but then you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And that's kind of how you do the event, basically.
Yeah. Okay, great. So it is in a certain sense, like it's not this like John, it isn't, I like the way you described it, like symphonic in some way, because, and I think there's so many parentheticals here, but parenthetical, I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to your writing is that it is character first, and you build it out from there. And then it is in somehow the same way, right? You are writing these characters. It's just more complex, right? There's all of these characters. You have the entire, say, in this Marvel universe, right? Or whatever, you're writing. You have a ton of characters, and they are pursuing their own ends. And what would this person, based on their personality, actually do? And then it builds complexity from there. And then you also have the world changing and impinging on them. And then they have to figure out what they're doing within that changing world.
Yeah. It's definitely, especially the Marvel universe, it's so like, okay, what characters I think who are most interesting to ask the question to? Who best illustrates, and like, there's a lot, especially when you get the symphonic stuff, which is, like I said, it's slightly pretentious, but it's also definitely how it feels. There's a bit like between issues 5 and 6 where suddenly there's like I write 6 times between issues 5 and 6, and it spurges out. So you've got 6 essential character focuses, and each one of these are important things leading into the client. And You don't. Of course, you can skip them and go to issue 6 because I re-establish everything. But if you really follow it through, you'll see all these parts come together. But also, all these characters are really deciding how they're responding to this incredible situation. And it's, I must say, several, like, in those 6 issues, at least, there's several of them I'm really proud of in terms of, like, this feels like emotional in a way that events rarely are. Like, it's almost you take a breather between the explosions to go, okay, we're going to go really, like, beat up Tony Stark emotionally for a while.
Yeah, it's great so far in a way that, like, a lot of crossovers have not grabbed me before. And I'm wondering, we're right at the very end, so this will be the last question, but, like, I'm wondering if there is some kind of, if there is a foundation earlier in your life. I don't know if it's like role-playing games or something where you have this kind of complexity. Like, where do you fall in love with this complexity, or where does this complexity get inside you?
That's really interesting. I think it's I always think it's my biggest weakness as well. I often have a piece of paper in my head, edit, darling, edit. Because it's like quite a lot of my stuff could do with losing some. Sure. And when I'm on, when I'm on, it's good. And occasionally it's just, I think there's a classic thing when you read one of my long-going series, really is maybe about 3/4 of the way through, any art goes, I'm not sure what's happening anymore. Because it's like, it does all make sense. It's just slightly too many moving parts for people to hold on to. And I would have been better. This is why, like, I'm a very successful writer. I would be a more successful writer if I could edit. But at the same time, like, what I do is so reliant upon the excess. It's like, I think any creative would say at some point your flaws are your strengths. The reason why you won't be a certain kind of creator are the reasons why you are the person you are. So part is just saying, I just think the world's complicated. Like, and I'm like, I think narratives are, irony is something I like. I don't mean irony in terms of not meaning it. I mean in terms of these things are all true. And, like, that you can make a more meaningful statement by doing all these stories together and say, okay, all these people are approaching this situation, having their own angle. So, love, it's like love can triumph and love can be lost. You can do a story, both of those stories simultaneously at the same time. You say, well, both are true or can be true in these ways. Or this is how love can be lost and this is how love can triumph. So that's just, it's more of a philosophical way of seeing things for me. And it might just be like uncertainty. Like I'm, especially the older I get, the more twitchy I'm over, like, certainty. I think certainty is incredibly dangerous. Which is like, I'm doing a face here. So, like, listeners, you may realize that I'm not entirely sure I agree with that, which says everything. Like, I'm uncertain about uncertainty.
That happened to me when I was studying philosophy, where I went in where I'm like, oh no, these things are true. And then I come out of it being like, well, I guess I can see both sides of most stuff. Not like in America where everyone's like, yeah, the Nazis and the people who want Medicare for all are the same. Like, not that way, but just where I'm just like, well, I can see, I don't agree with the Nazis, but I at least see, like, how they exist.
I must, like, looking at systemic things. I think it might come from games, not even just role-playing games, but computer. I haven't talked about computer games much, but, like, anyone's played, like, Civ or SimCity, like, means that, like, you're aware that stories, when I say stories in quotation marks, can be told via, like, complicated mechanical systems. And, like, what is Tolstoy but his simulation? What is, like, War and Peace but his simulation of Russia? Like, that's a line I've used somewhere else, I think. But, like, what I mean? Like, that interests me because I think the world's complicated. And all those kind of, like, that febrile life wriggling away is everything to me. And again, maybe that's why I fell for Tolkien originally. The excess of Tolkien, the idea of it went so far off the sides of the pages. Like, you didn't have to know the world building, but he knew it was there. So yeah, there's a bit of that, I guess. And I think on some level, I just really like work. Like, especially in comics, I feel bad that writers don't work as hard as artists. So it's kind of like me doing what I do is to be sunborn of guilt. And yet again, we return to Catholicism.
There you go. And also, if you think about the grandiosity of Catholicism, the mythology of Catholicism, if you actually, like, start reading this stuff when you're young. I know I was, like, bored in temple and just reading the Bible. There's also a lot of, like, you're learning about, there's a lot of contradictions in there. And there's a lot of things that are, like, two truths that are true, but not true can't be true at the same time. And you get a lot of that stuff kind of, like, if it is religion that starts with you, that gets that seed inside of you, you can kind of see the precursors in that.
Yeah. I found myself like literally Warhammer 40k. If you take Catholicism and add heavy metal, you get Warhammer. That's kind
of. I know you're busy, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. It was just very lovely. I'm a big fan of your writing, so it was just so nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Honestly, this has been a delight, and it's like honestly, it's given me a lot to think. Not a lot to think about in that way, but generally like, oh, this is interesting. So I'm going to probably listen back and think, what do you actually think of what you said here? It's like,
right? Was I just saying it in the moment, or do I actually believe this?
Yeah. I mean, like it's actually like me thinking about the idea. I mean, I've occasionally thought about like how conscious was I before university, but like I don't think I've ever really talked about it at this length. So I'm like, I want to listen back and genuinely think about who I was then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always remember like the first time my brother saw me flirt with a girl, he was amazed. The idea that people could his understanding of humanity changed. And to us, I sent him down a dark route because my brother's a much better flirt than I ever was. But that, I mean, like, what was going on with different stages of humanity there? Yeah. Lot to think about. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh.